So, dear friends, I invite you to come back. And we are ready to start our third part of the program today. I'm very happy to introduce you a very big friend of a Russian house in Brussels, Oleg Barabanov, who is the head of the Department of Integration Process in European States Institute in GIMO University, and who is the program director of International Discussion Club Valdai. Today we will speak about Russian-European relations and in general, Russia and Europe in global context. Even the state of play is not that developed right now, but we will focus on our historical relations and maybe see what can we do. So thank you very much for attending the meeting. Mr. Barabanov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luciana. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Sure, it's definitely not a good moment to speak about Russia-EU or in general Russia-Europe relations, because they are in a quite bad state now, we all understand, and because of the Crimean situation and because of the violations of human rights and because of Alexei Navalny affair, chemical weapons, Novichok, a new Russian word that became known to everybody in the world now, and so on. But this is not the first time in history that Russia-Europe relations are terribly bad. I hope that sometime the situation will become better, but we'll see. Starting with history and also history with history and with the present situation, maybe the main question is, could Russia be a normal European country, or is it absolutely impossible for this? And in history, because geographically you see that Russia is both in Europe and Asia, starting from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok to the Pacific Ocean. And in the Russian official coat of arms, we have an eagle with two heads. One head is looking west, another head is looking east, so it's maybe a symbolic view of how both Europe and Asia are considered within Russia. And frankly speaking, already in 19th century, there was a big discussion among Russian intellectuals whether Russia should be a normal European country, where Russia should be westernized, and if yes, by what steps, by what methods, and so on. So in the second half of the 19th century, 1850, 1860, there were two intellectual movements in Russia. One was named exactly as westernizers, Zapadniki in Russian language. There were some writers, some journalists, some actors who supported the idea that Russia should be westernized not only superficially, as Peter the Great did at the beginning of 18th century, but also in their mind, in their political behavior and their social behavior, and so on. And there was the opposite movement in Russia at the same period, the second half of 19th century, that was named, how to translate it in English, let's name it Slavophilia, Slavianophily. So the people who like Slavonic race, the people who like the specific pan-Slavonic position of Russia. And in that sense, the idea was totally opposite, that Russia could do nothing with the Western Europe, that Russia belongs to a different kind of civilization, in that sense, pan-Slavonic civilization, and Russia should promote the pan-Slavonic activities. In that period, in the period of wars and conflicts in the Balkans mainly, between Russian and Ottoman empires, it was useful to promote these pan-Slavonic ideas to support the Bulgarian nation state, the Serbian nation state, and so on. And so in there in 19th century, the pan-Slavonic idea received more support, more public support among Russian intellectuals than the Westernizers idea. In fact, one of the leaders of the Westernizers, a writer and journalist, we would say the opposition activist now with contemporary slang, Alexander Gertsen, he was forced to emigrate to London, and he started to publish in London his journal on Russia and so on. So two trends in our intellectual exercises, let's say, but maybe the most important and the most surprising thing that the official power of Russia, the official imperial establishment, was wary and skeptical towards both intellectual trends, because both of them, Westernizers and pan-Slavonic movement, they proposed some independent way of thinking without strong connection with the empire, with imperial bureaucracy. And in that sense, both of them, both Westernizers and both pan-Slavonic intellectuals, were not in good terms with the imperial court of Russia. That's another thing that may be very important for me personally until now, that you can choose whatever intellectual trend you want, and you could support whatever intellectual trend you want, Westernizing, imperial, autarchical, or anybody else, but the imperial bureaucratic establishment, or now the state bureaucratic establishment, is not that happy with anything. That's another problem that we have in the Russian public discourse, for me personally at least. But it's another point. Then already in 19th century, Russia received a quite bad public image in Europe. It was started with the Crimea War of 1855, when Russia was in war against a coalition of France, UK, and Ottoman Empire in the Black Sea, and Crimea was one of the main theaters in in that war. I don't know how is in Brussels, but if you go in Paris, you can see Rue Sebastopol, Rue Balaclava, Rue Malakoff, the same in London, and among the former dominions and colonies of British Empire, Malakoff Street, Sebastopol Street. That's exactly in the memory of coalition victories in the Crimea War. And in that war, at least from my point of view, there was the first example of a modern information war, because Russia was portrayed with very terrible, very bad cartoons, caricatures, absolutely not politically correct journalist articles, both in France and UK, and so on. Then we have the beginning of the 20th century with the campaign of imperial anti-Semitism, unfortunately, in Russia. That's true too. And because of that, the bad public image in Russia was supported once again in the Western public opinion. In that time, mainly in the US public opinion, but in the European one as well. And surprisingly, Russia turned good for Europe only in the World War periods. It was the World War I when Russia became the ally of Entente with France and the UK. And in that sense, there was already an information war against Germany in the French and British and Russian newspapers and books. And Russia was portrayed quite mildly that a kind of our exotic ally in the East and will do the same thing. More or less the same was in the Second World War. If you see the British and American propaganda information during the Second World War, sure, it was totally and hugely anti-German, anti-Japanese, but the Soviet Union was exactly our, once again, our exotic ally, with good guy like Joseph Stalin as its head of state, and it was okay. So it's maybe there are only two periods when the public image of Russia in Europe was absolutely good, was in the period of two world wars. And it's quite interesting. In the Soviet time, Russia proposed by default the idea of, let's name it, a communist globalism. It could be done in the first way of the world revolution, or it could be done in the more or less peaceful way of peaceful coexistence in Khrushchev and Brezhnev times after Stalin's death. But nevertheless, it was an alternative global project to the West mainly, to the Western values of capitalism, of market economy, of Western democracy, and so on. So it was an alternative. And in that sense, Russia was not, that discussion whether Russia should be in Europe or not should be in Europe, it was not so active in Soviet times because we considered itself in the bipolar world of that time like a global leader of all progressive humankind. That was another Soviet slang. And in that sense, whether we European or not was not that important. And the situation has changed after the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 independent states. And it was a huge discussion in Russia, what to do now intellectually. Was it a good thing that the Soviet Union or the Soviet Empire, whatever you want to name it, collapsed? Is it good for Russia that Russia has lost many of its territories, of Soviet territories? From the imperial point of view, surely the answer is negative. From the view of the normal European country, the answer is positive, and in that sense, the collapse of the Soviet Union was not the liberation only of, let's say, Lithuania or Moldova or Ukraine or Kazakhstan, but the liberation of Russia itself, because Russia itself also now was free from, at least mentally, from its imperial past, and Russia could start its European, its normal way of development, maybe not from zero, not from absolute zero. Still, we have the historic memory and so on, but Russia could start it without all these imperial phobias and phantom pains and so on. And at the 90s, maybe in the period between 1992, let's say 96, Russia tried to follow exactly that way, that Russia is totally new, that Russia is now is not an enemy to the West, to the United States, to the European allies of the United States, and Russia could do what possible to support the pan-Western ideas and pan-Western movement. But this official way, which was promoted by then Russian President Boris Yeltsin and our foreign minister of that time, Andrei Kozyrev, he was not, being frank, quite widely supported by the public opinion. And in that sense, at least a significant part of the Russian of public opinion of the Russian society was of the view that there was absolutely no liberation of Russia, in that sense that it was the liberation of Estonia, liberation of other Soviet republics, but there were or liberation of Poland, liberation of Romania from the socialist camp system. But it was a clear Russian defeat. And there were only two countries in geographical Europe who faced this kind of defeat at the beginning of the 90s. There were Russia and another country, it was Serbia, because the Yugoslavian Socialist Federation also collapsed. The wars in the Balkans started, and Serbia, in that sense, as the republic number one in the former socialist Yugoslavia, were more or less in the same position like Russia as the republic number one within the Soviet Union. So in that sense, already anti-Western and anti-European way of thinking started to become popular in Russia already in the 90s. In 1996, the pro-Western foreign minister Andrei Kozyrev was replaced by Evgeny Primakov, one of one of promoters of another way of thinking, that Russia could not be in the West, that Russia could promote its own way of development, and so on. And starting from the second half of the 90s, Russia started to, not to clash exactly, but remember the Clash of Civilizations of Samuel Huntington. It was published in 1993, exactly that period. But Russia started to contradict the big Western projects in Europe of that time, mainly the NATO enlargement, and a bit later the European Union enlargement. Then there were also the Kosovo War, where Russia and the West were on the opposite sides de facto. And this situation, this chance, if you want, and if you support it, for Russia to become a normal European country without imperial heritage and without imperial ambitions, was only for a relatively short period, for 4 or 5 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. After that, the imperial heritage started to play back. And with Vladimir Putin becoming the Russian president, this situation was also repeated. Because in the first years of the Putin's presidency, he became the president in the year 2000, and after that there was the 9/11 terror attack. Then Russia supported the United States and NATO de facto in the war on terror in Afghanistan. Then Russia decided not to contradict so vocally against the second wave of NATO and EU enlargement in 2002-2004. So the first years of Putin's presidency, we can name it as a kind of pragmaticist policy. And in fact, it was the term that Putin liked to use himself in that time, that Russia is pragmatic, that if it's in Russian interest to support the Americans in Afghanistan, so we'll do it. We'll see no problems in Europe, and so on. But then this situation has changed. We can discuss what became the starting point of this situation. The official Russian narrative is Russia and Putin became, how to say, disillusioned because by the way of pragmaticist policy, we proposed our friendship to the West, and the West was continuing to snob in Russia, to not trust in Russia, and so on. Maybe the Orange Revolution in Ukraine at the end of 2004 became a turning point. Maybe some other events in that period, maybe the quite well-known Vladimir Putin's speech at the Munich Security Conference, when he proposed the Russian alternative in that sense. And also in this period, there was another ideology, let's say, or set of values, or maybe better say its ideology, was promoted in Russia. It was named a sovereign democracy. A sovereign democracy. So the idea was that there are no universal values of human rights, of democracy, of the market economy, and so on. So each country, each civilization has its own historical and cultural set of values and approaches towards democracy. And so nobody can impose his own or her own or its own views on democracy on other countries. And in that sense, the West has the Western style of democracy. Russia has the right for its own style of democracy. China has its own style of democracy, it has. And Brazil, another one, Latin America, another one, Africa, another one. So it was a proposal of alternative, not only of in geopolitical terms, but an alternative of values. And this idea became quite popular globally. And exactly this idea, it became in the center, in focus of the establishment of a totally new global coalition. It's the BRICS coalition, the coalition between Brazil, China, India, Russia, and then South Africa. So countries geographically distant mainly from each other, Brazil in Latin America, South Africa in Africa, Russia in Eurasia, and so on. But the common idea, the common denominator was exactly the alternative view towards the Western values, towards the Western political behavior. And in that sense, Russia started to promote these alternative values as well. Was it sincere, or was it just cynical political mechanism? It's up to everybody to decide. For me, it was a kind of 50-50 division between sincerity and cynicism in this promotion of alternative views. But nevertheless, we see now that this BRICS is developing. Another, let's say, not anti-Western properly, but alternative to the West, alternative to the Western values, organizations like Shanghai Cooperation Organization are also developing. So in that sense, Russia and then China proposed a new alternative to the world, and every country could to choose what to do, whether to follow the Western and EU in that sense, democratic way of development, democratic way of political behavior, or to choose the opposite, the opposite path. And in that sense, if you can see the newspapers, the research texts, the expert narrative of that time, the first decade of this century, there was a quite popular idea in the West, in the US, but in the EU as well, of the promotion of democracy. So the European Union became proactive. And in that sense, the EU, the United States, the West in general, could not only be satisfied with democratic values developed in their own countries, but they were obliged, let's say as well, to promote them globally. to take, let's say, a torch of democracy and to bring it towards other countries. And this alternative opposition headed by Russia and China, or maybe better say China and Russia, was exactly quite fearful, quite skeptical towards this Western promotion of Western democracy, Western democratic styles, and so on. And also, what is what it's interesting to say, there is now we'll see maybe the new round of this idea of promotion of democracies and its opposition from Russia and China and other countries. That's the idea that was quite popular in Joe Biden's pre-electoral campaign. His idea to strengthen what he named a League of Democracies, to find a new basis for democratic solidarity, not only in the Western community of US plus EU, so not only in the transatlantic community, but globally as well. And sure, if you have at one pole the League of Democracies, it's quite clear that at another, at the opposite pole, you have a League of Dictators. And now this political contradiction, which became not only geopolitical, but also cultural, also focused on human rights, maybe much more than it was in previous decades. This contradiction is in the center of Russia-West relations and Russia-Europe relations as well. And the last point, what Russia wants to do, because after the Crimean crisis, there was two options for the Russian strategy. One was and is to break totally with the West. So we have nothing to do together, we have nothing to share together, and we are an alternative civilization. Vladimir Putin in last years likes to repeat this idea that Russia is a specific civilization or country civilization, like he likes to say. And we have nothing to do with the West. Another point of view, or maybe it was more direct and more sincere and more honest, maybe, way of development after Crimea and Ukraine. But there was another way of strategic thinking and foreign policy strategy, that Russia should not break totally with the West, that Russia should not break totally with Europe. There are some other mutually important questions, mutually important areas of interest, not only with oil and gas, but the global security as well. And in that sense, the Russian foreign policy and strategy for all 7 years after Ukraine and Crimea, it became quite pragmatic. And Russia tried to find every possibility and every opportunity to still keep the dialogue with the European Union mainly. Maybe on some marginal or not so important questions, but nevertheless. And this situation, it's maybe cynical. We've stolen the Crimea from Ukraine, but still trust us, still forgive us, and we are still important for us. And this logic, to some extent, was also at least understood in some offices in Brussels and in some capitals, national capitals of the EU countries. Maybe in Italy, maybe in Hungary, maybe in Czechia, and some other countries as well. In France as well, to some extent. In Germany, to some extent. That Russia is still useful for Europe. And it is not in interest of Europe to break totally with Russia. But this situation has changed in the last few months quite dramatically because of Alexei Navalny affair. And after that, because at least for now, the EU sanctions on Russia because of Alexei Navalny poisoning was quite small. It's a bit of a half dozen of Russian officials who are sanctioned personally, and that's all. So not that no economic sanctions, no strategic sanctions, and so on. But in Russia now we have absolutely changed narrative. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and other high-level officials, they said quite openly that Russia now is ready to break totally with the West, with the European Union, with the Council of Europe, with the United States. And so now we are at another turning point of our relations, whether it's a pure rhetoric, so we just making our stakes higher with this rhetoric that we are ready to break totally, or not. So the time will see. So that's my first, let's say, a set of ideas that I'd like to propose to you. And I'd be glad to hear your reactions, your critique, your questions, and so on.
Thank you so much, Professor Barabanov. And I would like to give the floor to participants to be able to address the questions. The first one is coming from Julien Godefroy.
Sorry, okay, just one thing. Unfortunately, I'm a chain smoker. And I'm at home, so if I smoke my cigar, it would be better for me.
No problem, please. And so there's a question from Julien Godefroy. Actually, he asked to read the question. So, because of the state of the relations between Russia and the West, Russia seems to want to increase its relations with China in many aspects. Nevertheless, some Russian experts are more than concerned about the nature of these relations because of the difference of economical power, demographic pressure around the Sino-Russian border, and the aggressive Chinese diplomacy in the Central Asia, for example. What do you think about this and the possible further developments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's true. That if you go in Russian streets, not only in Moscow but in other cities and towns and villages, and ask the people, the ordinary people, whom they distrust more, the West or China. I think that many of them will say that they distrust China more. And this unfortunately xenophobic approach in the Russian public opinion is quite strong. It also has his historic heritage, his historic background because of Soviet-Chinese clash in the 60s and 70s and so on. So in that sense, everybody, at least in European Russia, the people say, okay, we are Europeans anthropologically, we are Europeans by our culture, by our education, we are not Asian in that sense, and we are not Chinese in that sense culturally. It has nothing to do with China culturally. But politically, I already said that there was a quite strong cooperation among Russia and China on this alternative ideas building, let's say, with BRICS, with the Chinese formulas. Xi Jinping also like some alternative political formulas like peaceful rising of China, like everything with Chinese characteristics and so on. But also politically, after the Ukrainian crisis, China was the only major country who supported Russia politically in 2014. India was so-so. The West was quite totally against Russia. And the Russian establishment understood that China, in that turning point that was the Crimea crisis, was the only big superpower on whose support Russia could count. So in that sense, politically, Russia is tied to China. Before the Ukrainian crisis, it was in American interest to split somehow Russia and China. And me personally, I participated in one US-Russian expert dialogue on this, what Russia and the United States could do together in the Pacific region to not to block, not to stop, but to at least to react somehow to the Chinese rising regionally and globally. But after the Ukrainian crisis, after 2014, all these American projects to split Russia and China, they were stopped. And now at least both countries don't see any alternative, frankly speaking. And there is another point from the Chinese point of view. I also participated in several Russian-Chinese expert dialogues, and the Chinese said that they need Russia as a kind of, how to say, they are at the front line going to the new global leadership, and they need some supporters in the second front line. Sure, you are quite right that economically we couldn't compare Russia and China now, but strategically and politically for China, Russia is also useful for their own way to global leadership. So this is a kind of political pragmatism as well. And China was quite happy after the Crimean crisis, because all the West started to blame on Russia, and nobody started to forget about China before Donald Trump came to the White House. For Trump, China became the enemy number one. And before Trump, the Chinese were the enemy number two, maybe after Russia. And it was quite comfortable for the Chinese. They could continue their peaceful rising, and all the problems were on Russia, not on them. But with Trump, the situation was reversed. Now with Joe Biden, at least what we could see in the Alaska talks of US and Chinese foreign ministers, I think a week ago, the Biden administration planned to continue the rather tough position on China, and they are happy times in that sense. Maybe will not come back.
Thank you so much, Professor. And we will continue. And there is a question by Julien, please.
Yes, I will ask it. So it's about the vaccine. So do you think that the delivery...
Sorry, just if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Julien. I work as a translator specialized in international relations. I translate documents from Russian and English into French. So my question is about vaccines. So do you think that the delivery of vaccines from Russia in some countries of the European Union, such as Hungary and Slovakia, will maybe help to reestablish better diplomatic relations between Moscow and Brussels? Or on the contrary, do you think that it will be worse because it can be seen as a threat to the EU unity, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. You are quite right that now we have a kind of vaccine arms race. Yeah, previously in the Cold War we had just the arms race, the nuclear arms race. Now we have the vaccine arms race. I'm sure there was a kind of geopolitical competition. Who could invent the first vaccine, who can distribute the first vaccine, and who could promote its vaccine globally. And it's quite, so the question of vaccines was from the start totally political, not only medical. So if you are, if we are doctors, so we could discuss the medical pros and cons and so on, and medical procedures, clinical research, and many other things. But the point was not medical, but political. Now, without the publicity, I will see in Russia and in some other countries that started to use the one of the Russian vaccines, the Sputnik V, that it is not quite bad medically. I would say that that it can how to say produce antibodies and so on. Maybe not on 95 or 99%, but at least not worse than AstraZeneca vaccine has. And so the question is not medical. The question, the European Medical Agency, the EU Medical Agency started to analyze the Sputnik V vaccine now. But the question exactly in the political competition, and I would say if we take into account this vaccine geopolitics, we can see a bit different map of the world. If we take only the political, the geopolitical map of the world, so we can see the West, the European Union, the transatlantic relations, Japan, and so on, and the alternative pole, the BRICS, and so on. But with vaccines, there is the map of the world is becoming different because some Western countries start to try the Russian vaccine. Within the EU, it's Hungary, Slovakia, maybe he started, but it provoked the political crisis in Slovakia. Maybe some other countries would follow. At another point of view, we can see the promotion of Western vaccines, both Pfizer and AstraZeneca, in the post-Soviet countries as well. So these both geopolitical poles try to use the vaccine to, to take some new agreements in the opposite sphere of interest, in the opposite pole of interest. You are quite right. It's only 50-50. There is, I hope, from both sides, the sincere approach to use the best vaccine to vaccinate the people. And still, there is the political competition. Still, maybe there is also a question: what is better for Russia, the United EU or disunited EU? And some people say that the United EU is better. At least we have one voice in Europe. It's easier to make negotiations and so on. But still, there are some conspiracy thinking, maybe some not conspiracy thinking, that Russia as Soviet Union previously started to use whatever it could to disunite the West and disunite the European Union in that sense. So whether then the Hungarians started to use the Russian vaccine, does it mean that Russia split Hungary from the European Union? For me, more no than yes. Because the Hungarian policy was quite different, quite apart within the European Union previously. And Hungary had and has a quite different, more closer relations with Russia than many other EU countries. So in that sense, the vaccine geopolitics is a kind of continuation of previous political cleavages, let's say, within the European Union. Those countries who were closer in Russia politically, at least to some extent, at least for some spheres, like Hungary, like Czechia, like some others, like Italy, they are more open to take the Russian vaccine as well. That's quite logical, quite understandable. And other countries who are quite critical towards Russia, like the Baltic countries, some other, they are skeptical towards the Russian vaccine as well. So in that sense.
Thank you so much, Professor. And following this topic, there is a question by Rustam. Please.
Thank you, Professor Barabanov. I'm Rustem Barabanov. I'm one of the participants from Belgium. So just continuing on that vaccines program, do you believe, and what is your opinion, and do you think that some of the countries within Europe should have the freedom to choose whether or not they want to buy or implement the Sputnik vaccine? Because, for example, Serbia is one of the countries who is considering of using that vaccine, and you mentioned it's a political game it's becoming. So do you think like the EU should grant the freedom to its own EU member countries to choose whether or not they can or cannot buy the vaccine from countries like Russia?
Well, I think it's maybe not a question for me, frankly speaking, but for the European Commission. Sure that there are some EU medical agency rules and quite logical rule that the medical and pharma situation within the European Union could be as much homogeneous as possible. It's understandable. But the European Commission approved some extraordinary exceptions for Hungary, for example, to use the Russian vaccine. There is another, so it's not, this is the internal EU debate, and also Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, she said several days ago that we are waiting for the general EMA approval, but she said if it would be delayed, then Germany has her right to take her own steps and to choose any vaccine that Germany finds suitable. Maybe the most important question for the EU and for EU citizens in Hungary and in other countries who use the Russian vaccine, and for Russian citizens who are vaccinated by the Russian vaccine, for sure, would it be counted in the vaccination passports? So that now you know better than me, living in the European Union, that the European Commission proposed the idea of a kind of general EU certificate, vaccination certificate, or EU vaccination passport, who would facilitate the restarting of free movement of people in the European Union and outside the European Union. And for us, and for Russian manufacturers of the vaccine, and for Russian citizens, because I am vaccinated with Sputnik V, with the Russian vaccine. So if when I apply, when the situation became better, and when I apply for Schengen visa for coming for Brussels, for example, would my Russian vaccine be counted? Or I will need to take another vaccine by the AstraZeneca or by Pfizer or by some Western vaccine. So in that sense, there could be a kind of another barrier if each country or the European Union in general will use the vaccination passports only on one or two vaccines and will not accept other vaccines. So that could block the free movement of people. That would be another, I wouldn't say that it's a kind of apartheid, no, but it would be a significant barrier for the free movement of people globally after the end of the COVID pandemics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. And now the question by Augustine, please.
Yeah, my name is Augustine. I'm a Belgian student in public relations. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. That was interesting that you mentioned that the relations between Europe and Russia has only been good during World War. So hopefully we won't need to start another war again to have good relations. But I guess my question was, if these relations can improve if the EU develop a European army. I think that was the wish of Emmanuel Macron, a Europe that protects, and so be independent from NATO, because Russian diplomats and experts, I think, have the feeling that we are heavily, of course, influenced by NATO, and if we become independent from NATO, could that help improve the relations? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but it's another topic for splitting the West, yeah, in that sense, to split EU from NATO. Frankly speaking, I remember when the first round of ideas of the EU army was immediately after the Amsterdam Treaty. So it was 97, 99, in those years. There was some hope in some circles in Russia that it could split the Europe from the United States. That's true, cynically speaking, yeah. But another point was that at least for that period, the Americans, so the country number one in NATO, objectively, the Americans, at least in that time, they quite understood the so-called red lines, not to pass with the relations with Russia, not to provoke a global nuclear war and something like this. So in that sense, NATO and NATO battalions and so on, they were paradoxically more predictable for Russia. And I remember in that years, it was it was still before the Orange Revolution in Ukraine of 2004. There were discussions on the European army, and some military experts here in Russia, they raised the questions, okay, for NATO, we are sure that if there will be some conflict in the post-Soviet territory, in Ukraine or in Georgia or somewhere, the NATO troops will not go there. And what about the EU troops? Because if they are split from the United States, if they are split from NATO, in that sense, the joint European army, the joint EU army, is more free to choose the targets. It's more free to choose the zones of conflict in the post-Soviet space, which Russia considers its zone of prime interest. And in that logic, there was a kind of fear in the Russian, in some, not totally, but in some Russian military circles in that times 20 years ago, that the EU army could be more unpredictable for the Kremlin than the NATO army. So I think, but now the situation has changed. There are no red lines already. Everybody is doing whatever it wants, and maybe this logic will not work for now.
Thank you so much, Professor. And now, Ronald, please, your question.
Hello, I am Ronald. I'm robotics engineer doing research in biotech. I have a question also maybe linking to the previous question. Like I was reading in one article that one of the reasons why China gives so many incentives to Russia is what they want to prevent one possible scenario where Russia could instead just say, okay, we just join NATO and avoid all these sanctions. And that's what there's giving a lot of privileges, etc. But I don't know, would you think this scenario is possible? Would only take that to move Russia to join NATO in the possible future? I don't know, what would be your take on that?
Yeah, but for the real scenarios, at least for now, I don't think it's possible, because now the contradictions between Russia and the United States, between Russia and the European Union, are very strong, and the rhetoric is a kind of warlike rhetoric. But there is another thing with your question, that the Chinese don't trust the Russians totally, exactly because of this logic. They say, okay, now you are in the conflict with the West, and you are tied with China. You have nothing else to do than to be tied with China. But if the situation changes, if there will be some rapprochement in Russia-Western relations, Russia will forget China in 1 minute, and Russia will turn its back to China and its face to the West absolutely naturally. And in that sense, this logic, the Chinese, they have this distrust. That's true. I spoke with many of them. And what the Americans tried to do before the Ukrainian crisis, it was exactly to split Russia-China relations. But for now, I think this situation is not, so I couldn't imagine the scenario, at least in the current political situation in Russia and the current political situation in the United States, in many major European countries, that the West will propose a kind of rapprochement for Russia.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Now, Bianca, please.
Good afternoon, Professor Barabanov. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yeah, but could you speak more loudly? Yeah.
Yes. I'm Bianca Maria Tarditi. I work for European Parliament, and particularly in the ITRE and DAVID committee. And first of all, of course, I want to thank you for your presentation. And right now, my question is, of course, it's no secret that the relations between the EU and Russia right now continue to be quite tense, and we saw it in the last visit of Mr. Borrell to Russia on February. But is there a possibility, or at least do you see a possibility for Russia and the EU to get closer in the short or medium term, for example, in order to counterbalance the growing presence of Turkey in Syria, and in particular in the South Caucasus region? Thank you.
Thanks. First, the first point on Mr. Borrell's visit in Moscow. It was quite interesting for me because I've read some articles in the EU, in Poland, but not only in Poland, in other countries of the European Union, before the Borrell's visit, that he shouldn't go there. The main topic was he shouldn't go there because Russia is the country who poisoned its citizens with chemical weapons. Putin is a killer, and Borrell has nothing to do with the killer. And so Borrell was under quite visible critique within the European Union just before his visit, and after it also. And it was exactly in the framework of Josep Borrell visit that Sergei Lavrov first spoke openly that we are ready to break with you. So in that sense, the visit was not a success, quite sure. And it was not a success for both parts, because at least publicly, maybe we don't know some hidden agenda. Maybe it was just for the press conference, but they agreed on everything else again, not publicly. Maybe that's another diplomacy, but at least publicly it was quite critical for both sides. As for Turkey, the Russian public opinion is divided because when we started our involvement into Syrian conflict, it was in 2015, 1 year after Crimea. First, and Turkey there was one of the main enemies of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And in that sense, the Russian military were against the Turkish military. And the Turks, how to say it, shut down the Russian military plane and the pilot dead and so on. And so for a couple of years, Turkey was demonized in the Russian public opinion in 2015, 2016. Then the situation has changed, and Putin and Erdogan find some way for re-establishing the relations, found some way for cooperation. And so on. Turkey, at least publicly on the television, was turned from the foe to a friend, at least in one night, I would say. So, and this change of official position was quite unexpected for many in the Russian audience. And so the public opinion is divided. So is Turkey a friend or no? And this division became more sharp during the Karabakh conflict last autumn. And in that sense, unfortunately, not unfortunately that we have diasporas, it's logical, we have rather big Armenian and Azerbaijani diasporas in Russia. In Moscow, they are quite influential. The Armenian diaspora, from my personal point of view, is more influential in Moscow than the Azeri one. But nevertheless, the point was that both diasporas and both capitals, Yerevan and Baku, they started to manipulate the Russian media, and they started to manipulate the Russian public opinion agenda with their thesis, with their, so a kind of Armenian Azeri information war was played at the Russian television. And it was quite new, and it was, from my point of view, another threat for the Russian national security. Let's see what to do more neutral. I don't know. Okay, let's take, for example, Yemen, a conflict neutral for Belgium, yeah? And there are two parts in Yemen. There are two parts of Yemeni diaspora in Brussels, or let's say the Congo-Kinshasa. They have the conflict there. And both parts of the conflict use the Belgian television, use the Brussels newspapers to promote their point of view. So what you as a Belgian citizen would think on it? Sure, it's a real intrusion into your media sphere. It's a real interference in your public opinion and in your domestic affairs. It was exactly the same thing that with Karabakh, that both Armenia and Azerbaijan, frankly speaking, cynically speaking, corrupted and bought some Russian experts to promote their views on Russian television, on Russian newspapers. And in that sense, the experts bought by Armenia surely demonized Turkey. And the experts bought by Azerbaijan said that Turkey is good. And so if you are a poor countryman somewhere in Siberia, to whom to trust? So
I see. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. We still have many questions. Do you still have time?
sure, I'm sitting home.
Okay, thank you.
But it's up to you.
Yeah, we have just also Oli, Maria, and Christina. So Oli, please.
Yes, good evening, sir. I am Oleg. I work in the European Parliament as a parliamentary assistant. I would like to ask about the situation in Central Europe. I'm referring to Germany's decision to continue with the NS2 project, even though the US is against, and to the French-Russian political dialogue. What I mean is that somehow this seems to be creating some tensions, at least into transatlantic relations, and especially now after Joe Biden's election. So how do you see, I mean, this is a very wide question. How do you see the situation now in Central Europe? Thank you very much.
Okay. First of all, yeah, you'll see that I try to not to use the term the main countries of the EU, but okay, both France and Germany, let's say. Both France and Germany have their own agenda with Russia. To some extent, it is divergent from the general EU agenda. I think it's the job of Josep Borrell to find a way to do something with it, but sure that all countries have their own interests, and both Germany mainly economically and France mainly politically, they have interest to continue the dialogue with Russia. And for Central Europe, I mean, you mean the Central Europe in the strict sense, like Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, or Central Europe meaning continental Europe?
Well, actually, I should be more precise. What I mean, of course, is what France and Germany have now done, and what the impact is in the big picture on all the EU.
So if it's on France and Germany, it was quite interesting to see that for the Ukrainian crisis, we have now the main platform of dialogue. It's a difficult dialogue, but nevertheless, it's named the Normandy format, where we have Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France, and no European Union. So no Franca Mogherini and no Josep Borrell now. So in that sense, in the huge and controversial conflict near the EU borders, the EU has not speak with its own voice. It's the German national voice and it's the French national voice. So in that sense, the Normandy format showed that maybe there are some limits for the transnational integration of national foreign policies of member countries of the European Union. But I think it's logical. You cannot block totally the national interests, and every country within the European Union will have their interests. So the question is how to balance them with the interests of other member countries.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
There is maybe one more thing, maybe one more thesis for Russian propaganda or to counter Russian propaganda. There is a stereotype that Russia is always more willing to speak to national capitals within the EU, to speak to Berlin, to speak to Paris, to speak to Rome, than to speak to the European Commission. It was, from my point of view, also 50-50, but for 50% it's true. Because when we speak with Germany or with France, we speak on the base of national interests. So there are less possibility for values. There are less room for values disagreements. So if you are talking about interests, you can find the common solution more easily than you speak on values. So in that sense, yeah, the dialogue with national capitals is, if you just see our talks with member states and the last visit of Josep Borrell in Moscow, it's quite different. That's true.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And now, Maria, please.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Marie Brancaleone. I'm a student in a specialized master in European Studies, and I finished a master in international relations, during which I stayed for 6 months in Volgograd, Russia, so specific interest for Russia. So my question is, in the aftermath of the Navalny case, as you explained, the EU did not take new economic sanctions against Russia. So I didn't quite understand why, because after the Crimean crisis, they did, and it was quite efficient for them from their point of view, because it had a huge impact on Russia's economy. So I was wondering why they did not do it again. Is it because they don't consider all the history with Navalny as an as important event as the Crimean annexation? Or is it because it's not in their favor anymore to take new economic sanctions? And I also wondered how the Russian regime accepted those new sanctions. What is their point of view, how they reacted to it? And if they're happy that they only took like sanctions against specific members of the regime. So thank you for your presentation and your answer that is coming.
Thank you. I was the head of examination commission in Volgograd University for a couple of years. I also was there. Maybe you worked with Professor Ivan Kurila, or no?
I was in the language sector at that time.
Language,
so
not international relations.
No, not yet.
Relations. Well, as to the question of sanctions, yes, but maybe so the economic sanctions, they were not exactly immediately after the Crimea. After Crimea in March, April 2014, there were some personal sanctions on political activists in Crimea and so on. But the economic sanctions, at least the bulk of the economic sanctions was after the MH17, after the Boeing affair, and it was quite different. And yes, I don't know why the European Union chose the mild way, the moderated way with sanctions on Navalny. There is another thing. If you follow to the question, if you followed this situation, maybe you remember the change of positions with Amnesty International on Navalny. When they first proclaimed him the prisoner of conscience, and then 2 days later, they decided to cancel his name from the official Amnesty International list of prisoners of conscience because Navalny had a nationalistic background, because he was xenophobic in some of his earlier speeches, and so on. That's true too, but it may be interesting for you to see within the Russian opposition circles, because it was quite characteristic. Then maybe you know the name of Grigory Yavlinsky, the head of Yabloko party, the opposition Democratic Party, who previously was in the parliament. When Navalny returned in Moscow and was imprisoned the end of January, Yavlinsky said just 2 days before the Amnesty International decision that Navalny is the nationalist fascist, and we Democrats had nothing to do with him. Sure, he was imprisoned not legally, but he's a demon who was in prison. And in that sense, the struggle for power within the Russian opposition is of the same level of cynicism that we have in the Russian official establishment. You can understand it as well. And I think not everybody within the Russian opposition was happy to receive Navalny as a globally appraised leader of all the Russian opposition. And some other Russian oppositioners who were for 20 or 30 years with gold label, leader of the opposition, they were not quite happy with Alexei Navalny phenomenon and his huge popularity in on the Facebook, on YouTube, and so on. And in that sense, I would say that for me personally, I feel I have no, how to say, no text to prove it, but I feel that it was this anti-Navalny position within Russian democratic opposition who directly influenced the Amnesty International decision to cancel his name from the list of prisoners of conscience. And maybe it could influence also the EU decision, because the European Commission has some means to talk with the Russian opposition, with Yavlinsky, with some others, and to hear their opinion. So in that sense, the struggle within the Russian opposition could influence this, from my personal point of view, not proved in the court.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for the answer. And then there is a question by Christina, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Christina. I'm from St. Petersburg State University. And so my question is dedicated to the role of Russia in the Council of Europe. As we know, Russia is a member of Council of Europe. And this institution is one of the European institutions and somehow an incarnation of a big Europe concept. And so do you think that this membership of Russia in the Council of Europe could bring some rapprochement in the relations between Russian Federation and Europe at its broadest, so at the broadest scale? Thank you.
Yeah. So for the Council of Europe, it's also this two ways of logic. One is exactly what you've said, that it's a point of rapprochement, it's a point of dialogue, it's the point to explain our position, and we could keep it forever. Another position, it was if we break with the European Union, it's better to break with the Council of Europe as well, because the Strasbourg court is anti-Russian. It's quite popular officially blaming here in the public opinion. But let's compare two cases. First, when Russia was, how to say, removed from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe after the Crimea for 3 or 4 years, I think. And then there was the reintroduction of Russia in the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe in general. And there was not a huge discussion, but a kind of discussion in Russia there, whether it's in our interests, I mean in official regime interests, if you want, to keep the membership in the Council of Europe or no. And there 2 years ago, the main position, the most diffuse position was that Russia should keep the membership in the Council of Europe because it's our interests exactly to promote our point of view, to find new dialogues, to find new partners for dialogue, and so on. So 2 years ago, when there was a turning point #1 within the Council of Europe, to remain or to leave, the Russian position, official position, was to remain. And it was supported by France, by Germany, by Italy, and Russia was reintroduced in the Parliamentary Assembly. And okay, now with Navalny case, we have the second possibility of a new clash within the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. And now I see that at least some Russian deputies who are the deputies of the Russian parliament who are members of our delegation in the Parliamentary Assembly, they said quite openly after Sergei Lavrov's speech on that we are ready to break with the European Union, they said now we are ready to break with the Council of Europe as well. And they are high-ranked deputies. If you are in St. Petersburg, maybe you know the name of Pyotr Tolstoy, who is vice chairman of the State Duma and Russian vice chairman of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe as well. And he said, okay, if you don't hear us, we leave. So in these 2 years, the situation has changed from remain to leave. Is it a rhetoric? I don't know. Or is it a real intention to leave? Let's see. I don't know. I think it will be in April or in June, the next session of the Parliamentary Assembly, where the Navalny question could be raised once more. But let's see. It's in the new months, in the couple of months, we'll see it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Barabanov. It was a very interesting lecture, and thank you for your openness in answering the question. It's actually great to hear such an expert. And you smoke in a very beautiful way. So
thanks.
It was also very
I'm against smoking. I support. There is one hand of Rustam. If Rustam, you want to speak or just uploading me?
Oh, I just want to upload for the.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was interesting for me as well. I hope that this Russia-Brussels dialogue will continue. And the Russian House in Brussels, Lukiana and her colleagues, Madame Bunina, they do a really important thing. I was there
Thank you.
before the pandemic. So
yes, we hope to
be
continue.
once more.
Yeah, we hope to continue in person. We'll be very happy to greet you in our Russian house. So thank you so much. And for the participants, we will see you tomorrow the same at 2. We start, and we ask you to enter Zoom a bit earlier. Have a great evening, and see you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.